Well, thank you, Scott. I knew Scott back when he was the world champion golfer of Clark County, not many years ago. I thought Tiger was scared there for a while, but then Scott retired. Yeah. You guys remember that, don't you? 1997, 25 years ago, my wife, Sarah, and I came with our 5 kids from Michigan to come back and teach at the college, and my kids were 2 through 10, and we came to the Southgate Baptist Church, and many of you probably remember them then and remember me then, and you're saying to your spouse, man, that Scott Dixon's gotten old, hasn't he? How old have you gotten? But there's one thing that never changes at Southgate Baptist Church, and this one thing you would all agree is this: John McGilvery never ages. Am I right? The man looks the same. I knew him back in the 80s, and he still looks the same. I played soccer for him. He still looks the same. I bike on the bike path down by Cedarville, going to South Charleston. Who whizzes by me? John McGilvery. But anyway, good to see you, Coach McGilvery, again, and so many of you. And I was just thinking just before, during the worship time, how many of you have played an influence in my kids' lives back when they were 2 through 10. And you know who you are, and I'm grateful for that. So it's no problem to come back at short notice. I'm always happy to help the fine folks at Southgate and to be with you this morning. On this interesting weekend, as I was driving up praying about this, it's the day after Christmas Eve. So you guys have been churched out, haven't you? But that's good, right? Christmas is that special week of the year where even people who don't give Jesus much thought at all will at least think a little bit about the Christmas story. And those of us who do go to church on a regular basis, it's kind of an enhanced, intense time to focus on the manger and to focus on the baby, but then to remember he doesn't stay a baby. And he grows up into be the man who gave his life for us. So that's why we're here, and I hope and pray that we can enjoy one more time in this Christmas weekend, celebrating him. And I actually want to do it from a different kind of passage that'll make us think in a little different way about what Christmas is all about. If you ever stop to think about the movies that we watch and the stories that we read, both ancient and new, they all tend to have the same plot. They tend to have the same pattern. They will have some strong person who is required to become weak to accomplish a task to save everyone. They require a strong person to go on a quest. And we love that kind of literature. We pay buku money to watch those kinds of movies. You can go to older ones, like Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Looking for the Holy Grail, another movie where Indiana is called to go through these kinds of quests, to perform miraculous feats again and again and again. Only the penitent will pass. But our entertainment industry hasn't changed. Now you have everything from the Transformers to Batman, the Avengers, even to the video games, the Legends of Zelda. My 30-year-old got a Legend of Zelda yesterday. It still rings true, right? We love to watch, to play with people who are on quests. It sells. Why does it sell? Because it touches a nerve. It goes all the way down to our hearts. Because in reality, we all want to be the hero. We all want to be on the quest. We all want to be the hero of the story. But the question I have for us today is that how life normally works? Is that how it's supposed to happen? Well, I want to take you back to an Old Testament passage where we can learn the answer to that. Turn your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 5. 2 Kings chapter 5. I just want to read a story many of you would have heard in Sunday school about a strong man who was willing to risk everything to win the day. And his name is Naaman. So 2 Kings 5, I'm going to start in verse 1. Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Syria. And he was a great man with his master and in high favor because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. Naaman was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. And this little girl, she said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and he told his lord, the king, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman went, taking with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, and this is what it read. "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes. And he said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how this king of Syria is seeking a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angry. He went away saying, "Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me, and he would stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than him, than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So Naaman turned, and he went away in a rage. But his servants came near, and they said to him, "My father, it is a great word that the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So Naaman went down. He dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. Naaman. Naaman was a strong man. He was willing to risk everything to win the day. And from the story of Naaman, we will learn 3 lessons about the quest that we call life. 3 lessons that we can see in his story that we can apply to ours. And the first lesson is this: we all would like to be the hero of our story. We'd all like to be the hero of our story. We want to remain in control of our lives. We want to write our stories. We'd like to think we have something to offer to God. Now, when you see this man Naaman in 2 Kings, you come across a man who is used to being the hero. And for a time, he was successful in that quest. He was the mightiest warrior of the mightiest army on earth, the general in charge of Syria's army. He was also so tight, so close to the most powerful person, the king of Syria, that he could actually ask him a favor. In China, they call that guanxi. He had the juice. He had the connections. And also, Naaman had all the riches and the prestige that kind of power brought with it. Naaman was a hero. But then Naaman was handed a death sentence, a roadblock to his quest. He got leprosy. You know, disease is the great leveler of us all. Naaman would not just lose his life, he would first lose his position of power. Generals cannot show a hint of weakness, and he was going to slowly die. He would lose his connections. You think COVID vaccines and quarantines are bad. If you got leprosy, you were sent outside the city, forced to live apart from everyone, even your family. He would lose all his connections. And he would also lose all his riches, because what good would they do him now? This first lesson teaches us that we are all trying to be the heroes of our story. If you go back to Genesis 3 and think about the temptation that Satan put in front of Eve and Adam, what was he doing? He was saying, don't follow God. Don't follow the story he's written for you, because he doesn't know best. You know best what you should be doing with your life. Your life will go better. Your quest will be more successful if you write your own story. And since then, we've all been born trying to write our own stories with us in the center. We all want to be the heroes. We think we can do it better. This independence runs deep in our souls. We are the center of our story. We think we can figure it out. But there are consequences to that. As we know, to the rebellion of Genesis 3, there are curses. And we've all been handed a death sentence. From Ponce de Leon till today, we've been searching for ways to figure that out. Only John McGilvery has found it. In fact, a couple years ago, there was this firm out of Massachusetts who would provide you, for a small fee, the blood or the transfusion of blood, plasma, from someone under 25 years of age. So that you, they boasted, would start to feel young. It might even cure your heart disease, even Alzheimer's. All you needed to do was send them $8,000, and they would send you this. Now, if you're thinking that sounds good, I got some bad news. Not long after that, the doctor in charge lost his license to practice medicine. So I don't know if it works. But seriously, you can read about, especially out in California and Silicon Valley, all those guys with so much money they don't know what to do. They're all searching for how to make their life last longer. Why? Because they know there's going to come a day the money will mean nothing. They're trying to make it last. They want to be the heroes of the story, and they realize disease is in front of even the strongest of us. We all have roadblocks to our quest. It may not be disease right now for you. It could be an unhealthy relationship. It could be lost work, less than satisfying job. It could be an addiction. Maybe in this season, it's a family that doesn't get along. Something that's blocking the quest of life for you. But there's some good news in the midst of this first phase of the story. Even in the midst of the roadblocks of life, God will send a missionary. God will send someone to give us hope. And they often come dressed in the most unlikely costumes. See, God had a missionary in Naaman's life. In verse 2, it says the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel. She worked for Naaman's wife. And when she heard of Naaman's problem, she knew an answer. And she pointed them back to Israel and to Elisha. She pointed them to a path of overcoming the roadblock. Many of you have had missionaries in your life over the years. People have given you hope and your quest. People sent by God to be a missionary. All of us today here are called to be such people. To be the people who give hope to others out there who don't know the answer to their quest, who think they're still in charge. It could be in our families. It could be at our workplaces. It could be in our neighborhoods. It could be in our schools. But God sends missionaries, often the unlikeliest of missionaries. And he sent Naaman on a quest. Now, Naaman still didn't quite get it. He took with him his riches, his silver and gold. Naaman thought he could buy his way in. He also took his connections, right? He had a letter from the king. Naaman thought he could smooth his way in. Then, of course, he took his reputation. The general in charge of the mightiest army of the earth, he thought he might have to fight his way in. He came to Israel thinking he had something to offer God. And let's don't think too poorly of him. That's the way the world worked in that day. It was quid pro quo. Right? I mean, remember the king of Israel's reaction to the letter? He knew that if he couldn't get Naaman cured, then he was on the hook to the king of Syria. You help me, I'll help you. And that's how Naaman thought life would work with him. That's how he thought life would work with God. He thought he had something to offer God. Here it is, so fix me. But if Naaman had something to offer God, so God in return would fix him, who would then be the hero of the story? Right? If it was Naaman's riches that bought his way out, who would be the hero? If it was his ability to know the right people? Naaman, like us, often come to God and say, fix me. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Just tell me what to change and I'll change it. Just tell me how much to give and I'll give it. Naaman thought he could negotiate with God while still remaining the hero of his story. But God had other plans, and that brings us to point 2. Not only do we think we're the heroes of our story, God calls our bluff. When Naaman arrived at Elisha's door, he found out that this God of Israel wanted much more than Naaman was willing to give. Naaman came to pay this God of Israel a visit. And in verse 10 it says, Elisha didn't even come to the door. Wow. This mighty man comes to your door and you don't even take the time to go out to talk to him? And what does Naaman do? He throws a hissy fit, this mighty general. I mean, Think about the irony of what's happening here. Okay? This powerful man and this lowly prophet, according to his eyes. If Elisha had come to the door and asked Naaman for silver and gold, done. You got it. How much do you want? I can get more. If Elisha had come to the door and asked for a favor from the king of Syria, Naaman goes, done. You got it. Anything. Up to half the kingdom. If Elisha had come to the door and asked for the head of his greatest enemy, done. You got it. Show me where. Just bring me the broom of the wicked witch of the west. You got it. And Elisha didn't even come to the door, and he sent word, hey, Naaman, I just want you to take a bath. Just take a bath. What's Naaman so upset about? It seems to me he's getting off easy. What's the big deal about 7 voluntary dunks in the Jordan River? Well, think about it. What's it mean for a man like Naaman to be standing out in a river naked? Huh? First, he has to step out of his chariot, probably the second best ride in all of Syria, behind a king, tricked out with all the best gadgets, probably those little spokes coming out of the hubcaps. I mean, it's his place. When you're a king, right, that was his place of authority. I mean, general, that was his place of authority. Every battle he ever fought, that was his ride, that was his chariot. He had to step out of that. Number 2, he had to take off his clothes. I mean, one of the things about the military is their uniforms, right? These generals, the more stuff you have on, the more pins you got, right? The more respect you're supposed to earn. Naaman was going to have to take all that off. I mean, when generals say jump, you say how high, but no longer. Number 3, Naaman had to walk out on the water all by himself. His connections weren't going to help him there. So what's going on with Naaman? He basically is being asked to give up control of his life. Everything he depended on, everything he used to make his life work, he had to give it up and go stand out in that water. Now you can start to see why Naaman's so upset. As long as Naaman's kept his clothes on, up there in that chariot, who was the focus of the quest? But once he stepped out and took off those clothes, he gave up everything. So here's the question. Was the bar that Elisha, or we should say God, set through the person of Elisha, was that bar too low or was it too high? Naaman's a man of means, a man of great courage and valor, a man with friends in the highest places. It's insulting to him. It's insulting to ask him to take a bath in that dirty water. Any idiot could do that. The lowest slave could do that. Even a child could do that. Exactly. God was asking Naaman to do something even a child could do. Who's going to be the hero then? Naaman is not fooling anyone, is he? He doesn't want to step over that bar, not because it's too low, but because it's too high. Because God doesn't want his riches. God doesn't care about his connections. He doesn't need his great valor or his strength. God just wants Naaman's life. Remember, if Naaman's salvation were gained by his exploits, then who would have the upper hand in his relationship with God? If we negotiate with God and offer him something in return, who has the upper hand? That's not how it works with God. If we owe everything to God in his mercy and his grace, then we owe God everything. He calls the shots. Tim Keller calls that threatening grace. because that's what it is. What a powerful illustration of how we must approach God and how we will, in the end, approach God. Not many years ago, I don't remember how long, I was in this very room. I was in this room for a viewing at the funeral of Dave Driscoll. Many of you were at that viewing. Dave Driscoll died at the young age of 52 years old, and he taught at my kids' high school, Shawnee. He was a football coach for my oldest son, Drew, and he and his family were a part of Southgate. Dave was a godly man. Dave had a great impact, and that day, if you remember how long it took to go through the viewing, hours, you know the influence he had in that school, in this church, in this town. He left a beautiful legacy, yet, at death, in the end, all that stuff is stripped away. It's just you and God. I remember, coming, on top of the casket, they had the beautiful pictures of his family. But then they had this right in the middle, this black, shiny, brave helmet. Right? Had that there. And then, unfortunately, he had a Browns jersey, but we'll leave that alone. But that, right? And that's the stuff he loved. But, there comes a time for all of us, so the Lord tarry, right? Where we're going to be in the same position. On top of our casket, we'll have stuff. Not a Browns jersey, but we'll have stuff. Stuff that we thought mattered. But all the while, all those accomplishments, even the loved ones, they're all left behind. They're all gone. And we're just standing in the nakedness of our soul before our Creator, without anything to offer Him. What are you going to do then? Oh, mighty person, oh, rich person, oh, connected person. What are you going to offer then? Answer? Nothing. Nothing. God will call your bluff. We're not the hero. We don't write the story. We must let go of the things we think we have to offer God. If we think we have something to offer God, those things will indeed become our God. Happens every time. Those things, those relationships, that will become what we value most and what we think will get us through the journey of life. What are you using today to try to get the upper hand of God? What is your source of strength? What's your reason for hope? It's probably a good thing. It's just a good thing we've turned into an ultimate thing. That's become our idols. It could be a talent. It could be our riches. It could be the right connections. In this audience, for us, often it's a moral life. We think if we can keep all the rules, then when we get before God, He's going, hey, good job, you made it. But if it's a moral life that gets us okay with God, who's the hero? It's not the way it works. You want to meet God? Do you want to encounter this all-powerful God of the universe? Well, He's not asking for your riches today, and He's not asking for your connections or your power. He is asking simply for this, the control of your life. Which brings us to lesson number 3. We all want to be the hero. God calls our bluff, and number 3, in this story, we come face to face with the true hero. That's when the journey starts to make sense. I mean, who is the hero of Naaman's story? Boys and girls, it's not Naaman. It's not the king of Syria. It's not even Elisha. Who is the hero? Well, actually, Naaman tells us. We don't have to look. It's in verse 15 of chapter 5. Then Naaman returned to the man of God. He and all his company And he came and stood before him. And this is what Naaman said. Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. What has Naaman done? He's shown us the hero. Now, it may be a little difficult for us, in this day to understand the gravity of the statement that Naaman just made. You see, in his day, there was a direct connection between the power of your country and the power of your God. If my nation defeats your nation, then my God's bigger than your God. And if I start to suggest that another nation's God is bigger than my God, then I've got problems in my nation, especially if I'm the general. But what does Naaman say? There is no God in all the world except in Israel. The only true power in the world is not found in Syria. It's found in this backward country called Israel. Everything I live my life for, Naaman says, every battle I have ever fought pales in comparison. Naaman's whole identity is changed with that statement. And don't miss the exclusive nature of his declaration. There is no God except in Israel, except Yahweh. That would be such an offensive concept to his friends back in Syria. But with the help of his servants, he starts to understand where salvation comes from. That the only way on the journey is God's way. And the hero on Naaman's journey begins to change. It's no longer himself, it's Yahweh. And it's no different, by the way, in our day and age. Our culture doesn't like the idea of the exclusivity of Jesus. As long as he's a way, it's okay. But if he's the way, what does that mean? That he has to be the hero of my story too. I don't think I like that. I got other ways I want to live. It takes great courage, like that little girl, that little slave girl, to say there is no God in all the world except the God of Israel. In our culture, that smacks of bigotry and unloving. But who was the loving one in Naaman's story? Who was the one that spoke up? And from a powerless position because she loved her master. It takes courage back then, and it takes courage today to share with people that their gods are worthless. Their money, their family, their power, their connections, none of them could save them. That bravery is true love. The hero of this story is clearly the God of Israel, but what kind of God is he? There's so much irony in this story. All the no-name people played such key roles, and all the big shots were so powerless. The strong, the king of Syria, what could he do? Oh, he sent a letter. The king of Israel, what did he do? He'd freak out because he didn't know what to do. Naaman himself. No, it was the strong, starting with the slave girl, starting with Naaman's entourage, who spoke up and pointed him in the right direction. The ancient myths, like the recent myths in Indiana Jones, have people who are willing to risk everything to win something. Professor J.R. Tolkien, out of England, talked a lot about this. He studied ancient myths. And he taught those in England. And he ended up writing a book, an ancient myth, that we know of as Lord of the Rings, right? You've seen the movies or read the books. And he did something very unique in his mythology. Unlike the ancient myths where the strong were successful. See, Tolkien was so steeped in Christianity that the hero of Lord of the Rings is not the strong figure, but the weak figure. The halfling, the hobbit, who was willing from the Shire to go on a great quest to sacrifice the ring to save the day. Now, what does that sound like Who does that sound like? What did we just celebrate? We celebrated a baby in a manger. Does that sound very powerful to you? Why would we spend all this focus and all this time focused on a baby in a manger 2,000 years after the fact? Does that make any sense? It makes sense in God's story. In fact, we learn in Philippians 2. We learn in Philippians 2, Paul writes, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Jesus was on a quest, but he didn't become rich, he became poor. He didn't become powerful, he became weak. He gave up all his connections to be born to Mary and Joseph. Have you encountered this God? Not a God you can negotiate with, not a God you can placate with your good works or your self-sacrifices. Have you encountered the God of the Bible? The one we've been celebrating? The God who demands nothing but your life? The God who is the very hero you've always desired. One poet captured this beautifully. He's written, "The heavens frighten us. They are too calm. In all the universe we have no place. Our wounds are hurting us. Where is the balm? Lord Jesus, it's by thy scars we know thy grace. The other gods were strong, but thou wast weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to a throne. But to our wounds, only God's wounds can speak. And not a God has wounds, but thou alone." Who's the hero of your story? Follow him. Lord, thank you so much for this season. Lord, for the opportunity we have in this country to freely worship this babe. But Lord, even as we worship this babe, we know that in 4 months' time, we're going to be celebrating another holiday where this baby at 33 years old gives up his life for us. This hero is indeed a hero who offers us everything by the giving of everything that he has. That he will rise again on that third day to cement the victory that he has. Lord, again, for those who at this time of year dabble in the story of Christmas, or at the edges of the story, still hanging on to their own strength, but yet underneath know the struggle, bear the scars, suffer the consequences of all the blockades in life. I pray that they would be seeing for the first time, if they need be, the grace that you offer. Oh, it's a threatening grace, but it's still grace. May they be able to let go of all the things they think they can offer and just cling to you and the offer of the Son. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.